So anyway, what we've been doing is asking you to lead off with kind of your what you want people to know, your outlook on life, justify your existence as a human being, all that kind of good stuff, and then we'll ask questions from there.
Well, normally I'll start off with saying, you know, where I'm from, and but most of you probably know, but I was born and raised right here in Jackson County. Never have left except for the 3 years I spent in the United States Marine Corps. I was in the Marine Corps from December 4th, 1979 till December 4th, 1982. I was an electronics specialist, radar repairman. Was stationed in, well, after boot camp, stationed in 29 Palms, California, and Yuma, Arizona. Came home, took over as running the family business as the rate clerk, dispatcher, general, all around, everything working at Bost Truck Service with the family. Ran that business for 10 years. I jokingly say I loved it for 8. But my brother then took that business over. I actually ran for, going into political life, I ran for state rep in '92, won the primary but lost in the general, and at that time I'd taken a leave of absence. But it was right after that I got the call to go to Murfreesboro for the, to become a full-time firefighter for Murfreesboro. I had been paid per call since '88, actually as city treasurer. I was working as a firefighter helping out, and then '92 to '94, was a firefighter for the city of Murfreesboro. A lot of that blended in with what things that I was involved with. Ran for my first political office in 1984, and it was county board, and there was 2,800 votes cast, and I think I won by 12. And ran against a wonderful man by the name of Harry Brody, who encouraged me to run against him. He was 80-some years old at the time, and said he wanted to see, you know, I mean, he was a Democrat, but whenever I went to him and I said, they want me to run against you, he said, fantastic. I said, Harry, he said, no, he said, if you run and you lose, you get experience. If you run and you win, he said, I got all this great information I can give you, I'm not going to do this forever. And so it was like, the Murfreesboro American got very upset at us because we would go to every place and praise each other. And it was very, very confusing. So, but at any rate, county board, served as city treasurer in Murfreesboro the whole time with Bost Truck, you know, running Bost Truck Service. Obviously gave city treasurer up whenever I became a full-time firefighter. And then went back, ran for state rep in '94, was elected, and have held that office ever since. My wife Tracy and I have 3 children, and we have 9 grandchildren. All 3 children, we are blessed to, now that Stephen's home from the Marine Corps, he's still in the reserves, it puts all of our family within 6 miles of the house, and that's a very rare thing. And the main reason why I'm running is I'm not real happy where the nation is headed, things that are coming out of Washington, and what I've seen is how they've affected Springfield, how they have affected the local areas, and the concerns I have for those 9 grandchildren. And that's pretty well why I'm running. And I'll just answer your questions. That'll probably be the best about that.
Could you elaborate on specifically what it is that...
Yeah.
I mean, it's...
I can give you a list if you'd like. I will by the time we're done. Yeah. When we started down a path, and understand whenever, because I'm sure it'll come up, the day that I had the throwing papers on the House floor, it was only a few weeks before that that Nancy Pelosi had said, we've got to pass a bill so we can find out what it does. That is not what I want the elected person that's representing me to do. I want them to read to the best of their ability and understand to the best of their ability the bill that they're voting on and what the long-term effects of that bill will be. Whether it is Obamacare, whether it is what's happened with the IRS, whether it's what's happening with the EPA, the list goes on and on and on, and I can see probably the largest issue and largest concerns I have is with the loss of, while we're trying to bring employment to the region, government agencies are running amok. And many of those government agencies have no accountability to the Congress. And it's really wild that the state of Illinois actually has the opportunity for their agencies to put more control on them than the U.S. Congress does with their agencies. Let me explain that. For instance, in the state of Illinois, we just recently passed a fracking bill. That fracking bill was done in a bipartisan manner. It was done with the input from every group and organization, from the environmental side to the business side, in a way that it was negotiated out. Some were happy, some were, no one was happy. They thought it was the best bill. But when an agency is then required to implement the law that we passed, they implement the law, then they bring it back to a bipartisan, bicameral committee called JCAR, where they make the decision that yes, this is exactly what it is that we passed in legislation, and you're doing exactly what we told you to do in the legislation. If that's not the case, then they send you back to redraft the rules, okay? We're having that done right now with that. Let me tell you that it is something they take very, very serious, because it is bicameral, it is bipartisan, and the chairmanship rotates, boom, 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 every year. So, and the question is not whether you agreed with the original bill, it's to make sure that that bill is implemented exactly the way the legislature passed it. The U.S. Congress creates an agency, they put it in place, and they say, go. Unless there's some other problem, and then all of a sudden they have to drag them back. That's what's just happened with our emissions controls and those things that we tried to stop, that the U.S. Congress actually passed a bill over to the Senate, which is now laying on Harry Reid's desk, but has not been called. But the problem is that it couldn't be called by the Senate. It could have slowed it down that way, but thank heavens the courts did slow it down. It could have, well, if implemented, those rules will devastate the state of Illinois' ability to generate power for an affordable price, period. Not that I'm not for clean energy and new sources of energy, renewable fuels. I'm fine with that. But I've been on the Public Utilities Committee for years, and I know for a fact that it's only 6% of that is done by solar and wind. It's not because we aren't trying to get it to provide more. That's where we're at in technology right now. And 42% of our energy in the state of Illinois is provided by coal. If the bill would have passed, if the EPA rules come into effect and not allow the states to have control of their own destiny with this type of situation, what will occur is you'll have rolling brownouts and blackouts. And those people who are on set incomes that are right now paying $50 a month for electric bill will be paying $500 a month for electric bill. That is not smart. That is not smart government. It's not smart for the federal government to have an agency that we can't tether. And there's many other agencies out there like that. So there's a lot of problems I see and concerns that I see.
Let's talk a little bit about the Paul Ryan budget.
Oh, boy. Okay.
And we'll assume that any budget has good, bad things that.
Sure.
So what parts of it do you like, and what parts of it, if you yourself had the line item veto, would you change?
First off, let me explain this to you. I would not support any reduction in Medicaid, or Medicare, I'm sorry, I'm shift from Illinois to federal, Medicare and Social Security. I want to be very, very clear on that. I believe that there's an obligation that has been made to the American people that have paid into Social Security, and we have to work wisely to come up with a solution on how to make sure that it is available to pay out to those who have been made that promise. The same reason that as a state representative, I stood up against the pension reforms to the point that I wanted to see us to put some sensible things in place that would save the pension for the long run, but not reduce the benefits that were being paid to them, because it was a commitment and bound by the Constitution. That's the same thing with the Social Security, not that it's bound by the Constitution, but it's a commitment made. The rest of the budget is a case where we have to go line item by line item. And I'd like to tell you that I've read every bit of the Paul Ryan budget. But in this campaign, it's been stated specifically that I would cut those items. That's not the case. I've never said that. I said that, he came forward with a budget when nobody else would, which was kind of wild. And no matter what I've learned over the years as a state rep in the state of Illinois is that every budget is going to have something positive and something negative in it. You've got to weigh out whether or not you can justify voting for it. I myself saw that a lot of things that were in the Ryan budget, those two things in particular, that I would have offered up an amendment, and if those amendments weren't accepted, there's no way I could have voted for it. But
So specific to these two things, these were not insignificant parts of what made that budget a budget. So,
right.
So in order to restore this, where would you have gone to cut further?
I'd like to say that I had analyzed every bit of it, but let me tell you, and the problems that I see with agencies, because I'm not analyzed it line item by line item. I've been very good in the Illinois General Assembly with being able to look and find waste. As elected official for U.S. Congress, I would go in and go line item by line item and be able to give that answer. Right now, to go over and specifically nitpick, I can't give that answer.
And during the debate, you and Congressman and your traded a few jabs here and there or whatever.
Yeah, probably too many.
But putting all that aside,
Yeah.
what do you offer that he can't, or what is the main thing that you see that he did that you would have done differently?
All right. Let me tell you that whether you agreed with all of Jerry Costello's positions or not, we were different parties. Jerry was in constant communication with not only the elected officials, but just the people. He was always, when he was back in the district, and I know that from elected officials' position. I wasn't of the same party, but yet he called on a regular basis. I wasn't on the same party, but yet my staff and his staff talked regularly we deal with issues that somebody walks through the door and goes, oh, wow, we got a federal issue here. We call them, and we'd call over. It used to be Tucker over here, or we would call up to his office in Belleville and work together in that way. And let me tell you, that is something that didn't just happen with my office. I thought it was just mine because I was Republican, but I found out from other offices the same situation was occurring. These are service positions. I don't know why it is that he didn't understand that, or why he doesn't understand that, but the ability for open communication between our municipalities, our state, counties, and township governments has not been a line of communication that was open like it was whenever we were working with Jerry Costello. Now, that's not the only thing. He and I would have differed on several votes, too, but that, if you're going to be able to vote for your constituents and truly be the representative that you need to be and be the servant that you need to be, you need to keep open lines of communication. Let me explain that the first town hall meeting that he had, I had already announced that I was running for the office. The VA issue had come up. I was going to have a town hall meeting just as a candidate over in Marion, and did. After I announced that, almost a week I think after I announced that, he all of a sudden sent out a word that he was going to have a teletown hall meeting. Now, I've had teletown hall meetings too, but they're not town hall meetings. A teletown hall meeting gives you a buffer, a very good buffer. And on the same night and the same time as I was having that one. Now, after that also, whenever I made criticism of him, the fact him not being in touch, he then started advertising Congressman on your corner. I thought, well, great, fantastic. But then when you read about it, now everybody else, this is how Congressman on the corner works, because I used to do, as a state representative, had office hours in different areas. For instance, when I didn't have an office in Pinckneyville, I went to Pinckneyville and would announce in the local paper that I'm going to be in the courthouse for office hours from such and such a time to such and such time. Me. Congressman on the corner is just that. It's basically office hours for the congressman. That's why it's called Congressman on the corner. If you do something different, then you let him know. But every one of the ones that he had, from what we can tell, it wasn't Congressman on the corner. It was Congressman staff on the corner. And the best example I had of that was whenever I met with the mayor of Johnson City. And he and I were talking. He says, well, the congressman said he was going to have Congressman on the corner, so a bunch of us came over. He said he had 2 staffers here. He said, I went to one of the staffers and told her, well, I thought the congressman was going to be here. And she says, well, you know, he couldn't be here. I said, okay. He said, and first off, probably not the answer she should have given, but this is what she gave, and you can check with the mayor. But he said, I bet Bill doesn't even know where Johnson City is, does he? She goes, probably not. That's not the way to represent the people. It's tough. It's tough. It takes away from time from family, I know. It takes away from time that you might want to be doing other things, but you're asking for the job. Eric Cantor, and that's a prime example of you can get so tangled up in the Beltway that you don't pay attention to what's happening in the district. And that's why Eric Cantor is not going to be Speaker. He's not going to be any, well, that's not true. He's going to make a lot of money from what I hear, but that's a whole different story. but that's the rub. You've got to be, though it's congressman, it is U.S. representative. And I just think that we've been shorted on it.
There's a lot of money being spent on this particular campaign by both national committees and PACs and this, that, and the other thing. Why is this a good thing?
I don't know it's a good thing. It is a thing. It is what our politics are nationwide right now. Everything's reported. I think the most bizarre thing about the campaign finance reform is that you can't have input on a lot of this stuff. I mean, the state of Illinois, you do have input, but you report everything. And I thought maybe that would be better, but I've about decided that it's pretty much an incumbency protection plan they put in place whenever I see it. Now, that doesn't mean others can't win it. It's just not. But, well, one thing it's good for is for advertising. It's really wonderful. People can make money and do all that. As you and I were joking, it's good for my grandkids to be able to see me when I'm not around. They get to see me every day on TV. But I wish there was some more input from the individual candidate. There's been some things said that I maybe wouldn't have said, and there's probably some things that were said about me that maybe Bill wouldn't have said. But so that's the bad side. The reality is it costs a lot of money to get the message out. You know, when you start buying television in St. Louis market, I'm used to the Paducah market, and $60 a point in comparison to $600 a point. And it takes a lot of money to get the message out and get your name recognition up and get all of those things to occur. And so, they all come in. Now, from my standpoint, I'm glad they are in, because if they weren't, obviously I wouldn't have a chance of winning this race. I just wouldn't. I don't know how you can change that, though, without violating freedom of speech, when we've looked over the things over the years. I'm a little concerned, like I said, though, about the super PACs and all that. I wasn't around when it was voted on. It's the rules I got to live in. So it's where we live.
Jobs are obviously a major topic given the unemployment rate in Southern Illinois or whatever. What will you try to do in Washington to try to create a better atmosphere?
Fantastic. And there's about 5 different areas, okay, if not more. One is what I talked about with the EPA. We've got to make sure that the EPA comes off those proposed rules and actually allows our coal mines and our coal-fired power plants to continue to work. It doesn't make sense. Now, I'm all for free trade or for being able to send our coal other places, because that's the only market we've got right now. But it doesn't make sense to ship our coal to India and China to burn it in coal-fired power plants that have no scrubbers, where we could burn it here and put it in the same atmosphere and at least have it scrubbed, right? That's just my thought on that. So that also, when we start talking about oil and our ability to make ourselves independent, if the Keystone Pipeline comes in and is pushed for, and get the president to release it and get now understand the Keystone Pipeline, part of it is already there, the Keystone, but this is the Keystone XL. Okay, the XL comes over, it goes down through Wood River, it actually dumps right off into the Wood River refinery, 1Y off there, and then goes over north of Mount Vernon. So you got 2 locations, not only the construction jobs that will come along with that, but here's what's really wild, that one, the flow of that crude oil to be processed and what it would do to our fuel rates and the ability to be independent. But then also, people don't understand this, right now we have a booming grain season. But the cost of moving the grain is elevated because so many of the vehicles are used to transport the fuel, or the crude oil, not being able to get a cheaper price to transport the grain. That's from, my going out and meeting with everybody and talking with people at actually, where that information came from was with the farmers at Evansville, where they're loading onto barges. And the concerns that they have, and they showed exactly the breakdown on their grain prices, on the transportation cost in comparison. So you'd have the safest, fastest transportation of the crude oil. You'd have the jobs of the creation for when that all is turning up. Then all of a sudden, the refinery that is ready to handle that load has already been put in place. $4 billion worth of construction. It was right there at Phillips. We were there yesterday. And so it's ready to take that extra load, even though some of it's getting there now, it's taking longer for it to get there. So that's that. One other thing, and there's more than this, but another concern is the Granite City right now has a concern with Granite City Steel because of what has occurred in our tariffs not being placed on incoming steel from China and from, I think it's North Korea, China and one other country coming in. What it's doing is, because those tariffs are not put in place, even though they're already passed into law, the administration is not putting those in. What happens is it causes cheaper steel to be dropped in, which causes a decline in the ability for our workers to keep working. And we've got to make sure that if we've got tariffs in place, that the administration continues to use them and wisely, so that we have keep our workers working. The other issues, Scott Air Force Base. If any legislator or anybody running for this office doesn't say they wouldn't support Scott Air Force Base and understand what it does, what Scott Air Force Base does, and that's this, but then there's other ways we can look to try to expand what occurs there. One, we're centrally located in the United States. Two, I'm a Marine, and I was part of the Marine Air Wing. But you can't transport anything from any military branch without a communication through Scott. That's how big Scott is. All control of goods and movement comes through Scott, through their communication system. We've got to protect it, not just for the jobs, but for what it does for the nation and for our military. And SIU. We've got to understand where we're at. The majority of it is state involvement. We have to, the legislator has to be aware at all times of what's going on with SIU and understand how big of an economic engine it is. So there's many areas that you've got to watch for jobs, and there's no reason why the state of Illinois and why Southern Illinois isn't booming. I say that. There's reasons, but most of it is government involvement so heavy that it isn't allowed to grow.
You touched on SIU, which brings up the topic of college loan
Mm-hmm.
debt, the legislation that was passed a year or so ago. How can that be improved upon?
Well, I think it needs to be tied, and I don't know that for sure that it is. If it's tied with the interest rates right now, or is it a set interest rate? But you have to make sure that you keep the finger on the pulse of what is going on as far as where the interest rates are, and make sure that it is an affordable rate, so it just doesn't devastate someone to the point that they just throw their hands up and don't know what to do. Because what you want to remember about a college loan, it isn't like if you claim bankruptcy, you still got it. And so it's got to be to the point that some of the people who can have that opportunity to pay them off, and not discourage others from becoming the best, become educated in the field of their choice.
But it applied to new college loans.
New college
was
loans.
not retroactive.
It was not retroactive, and maybe there's something we need to look into as far as retroactive, because we're seeing so much. Yeah, it's rough. As a parent who helped pay for, of course, the reason why my son is that's not probably the only reason, but the reason why my son's in the Marine Corps was he came to me and said, "Dad, I'd really like to go to law school." I said, "Great, you figure out how to pay for it, you can." And he did. So.
We asked the congressman about the learning curve of being a first-term member of the U.S. House, and he said, maybe a year.
Yeah.
So what benefit, regardless of party policy, politics, what advantage would you imagine, and then someone who's been there would have?
Right. Let me tell you what advantages I would have, okay? One is, though dealing with different subjects, the ability to work with others across the aisle I've been able to do over the last 20 years very well. Some of my best friends are on the other side of the aisle, and some of my not so best friends are on my own side of the aisle. But you learn to work with people, and you learn the process, and the idea of going to Washington. Here's the advantage I have. A majority of the Illinois delegation I've served with and or worked with before, either as members of the Illinois General Assembly or as they were staffers. For instance, Rodney Davis, I actually helped him run when he was very, very young for state rep, and then he later became a staffer for us, and then went to D.C. and was worked with John Shimkus and others. Randy Holgren, Peter Roskin, and I became members of the Illinois General Assembly together. John Shimkus, I know him because he came in about the same time I did as far as that was concerned. And even on the other side of the aisle, even to the point of Jan Schakowsky, I don't know, we didn't work a whole lot together when we were in the Illinois General Assembly, but at least I could talk to her. We were going to be like this because we're just that much different in our philosophies. But I think the advantage of being able to come in with that experience, and the learning curve is still going to go straight up. It has to. Because we're now all of a sudden, I'm not talking about funding for our universities, I'm not talking about roads and bridges at the local level, I'm not dealing with the things at the state level. I'm dealing not only with national level when we're talking about jobs, now all of a sudden the area, though I'm a Marine, I still have to learn about dealing with our borders, foreign affairs, all of those issues. But I also know that if you put your nose to the grindstone, keep your ears open, don't go in with an attitude that, hey, I already know everything, but work and find out the best place to seek out the information to get the best information you can to make wise decisions. I've done it before.
The ACA has been a huge contentious issue in the House of Representatives. What would the Republicans have taken 50 votes to repeal. What would your stance be? I mean, it seems to be more common sense.
If it was Mike Bost and I was not one of 435, then I'd repeal and replace. But I don't have that ability. I have to work, as I said before, with what is there and with colleagues. I don't disagree with the original idea. I say it should be affordable. It should be portable, and it should deal with pre-existing conditions. But for someone to all of a sudden pass a bill and say, well, let's pass it and find out what it does, that's crazy. And it's proved out that way. And the big fear that I have right now is that come January 1, when the president releases the hounds, because that's basically what's out there, what's going to happen? Because it is not cheaper. It's not. And the amount of people who are choosing just not to have and wanting to take the penalty, I argue that there's not that many more people that are receiving health care. And we're not really, the Affordable Care Act, listen to what it says, it's Affordable Care Act. It had nothing to do with changing the cost of health care. It was who's going to get insurance, and all we did was shift how the insurance is divvied out and what the cost is going to be. And the long-term business effects, I believe, will be devastating if we don't come up and work together with some sensible plans to try to cure the problems. I want people to have quality health care, but I don't want it to be that control.
Any specifics as to what you would do differently than what's...
You know, right now, there were 60, and I'm going to say near 60, because I don't know, that were, and about 10 of them, I think, 8 or 10 of them were total repeals, okay, that were moved over to Harry Reid's desk. The others are modifications and or changes. And let me tell you who my advisor that I would trust more on this than anybody else is Congressman Dr. Price. He has the know-how and the understanding, and I will take his advice, along with my constituents, to search out the answers to the best of my ability. But I know I'm going to trust a professional in that. I can also talk to the business owners and find out, I know of small businesses that are changing their, one thing is your 30-day work. Why do you want to bump people back? Now they say they won't, but they are. They're reducing their work, their amount of hours that they're working to meet the requirements instead of doing something that should be put in place that encourages them to employ as many people as they can for the best salary that they can. But it ends up discouraging that.
Is that a matter though of the government regulation causing that, or is that an example of corporate greed?
No, I think it's the government regulation causing that. And the reason I say that is because a lot of the people I've talked to, they're not corporate greed. There's mom and pop shops.
But
Some of them.
The ACA only cover businesses that have 50 or more employees. I mean, that's hardly a mom and pop.
Well, it is around. Yes, it is. Sure, it is. You got hold on, I'll remember the name. We went and toured it the other day. They in Alton, huh? Abbott and Alton. They've got employees right at that level that have been with them for years, and they're trying to make a decision on what they're going to do. What they do is they take lathes, and they're big lathes. I'm not talking the high school lathe. We're talking from all over the world, and they bring them in and they refab them, and they resurface them, and they rebuild them and restore them, and put electronics into them. And the people that have been there in 10, 15, 20 years, and they're like a family. But the owner says, I don't know what I'm going to do with this. Those are mom and pop shops. Just because they have 50 employees, that's still mom and pops. There's just as many of those around. And the corporate greed thing, if you want to, I think that's a buzzword. I think that a lot of people that, when I ran Bost Truck Service, I cared for everybody I worked for me. Everybody was looking. Cared for their family, I knew their families. It bugged me up whenever work got slow and I couldn't find it for them that day. In the trucking business, believe me, it's feast or famine. And so I'm out beating the bushes. And then the next week, it's, my gosh, we're having to work so many hours. Some of the family members are going, is Dad ever going to come home? You know, or Mom. And so, yeah, are there those big corporations that are totally out of touch? Sure.
That's also.
Yeah. But there's an awful lot of small businesses that are affected too. And that's where you put the level on small. It's not working. The Affordable Care Act I mean, it's a whole lot more than a problem with the turn-up of a computer system and an entry system. Somebody told me, and it's just, so I'm just saying this, it's not that if you take the bill itself and the regulations that they've now already implemented in place and put it on the floor, stacked up, it's 9.5 feet tall. Why? I mean, maybe it's got too big. Maybe we need to look at it. Maybe we need to be sensitive. Maybe we need to sit down and, I mean, it was moved under nonpartisan. I mean, it was a pretty bash that we're just going to shove it forward. And that's what happens when you shove things forward.
In her campaign and specifically in the debate, Paula Bradshaw was highly critical of the Defense Department, the National Security Administration, referring to it as a failure. So I ask you for the equivalent of a 300-word essay on the tension between freedom and security. How would you respond?
I believe that we have to be very, and let me just take it to I understand the importance of a strong military. And the reason I say that is that I was in the Marine Corps during Carter and was in during Reagan. We couldn't even go get our hostages out without having the helicopters break down flying across because they kind of just backed off, and it's like after Vietnam, everybody was tired of it. And then the other problems that developed as far as lack of pay and things like that at that time. But we had a president that was not aware of exactly what the military did or just chose to do other things. We have to make sure that we're a force in readiness. We have to make sure we're a force in readiness. Whether we like it or not, we're at that position in the world. We know that it's water under the bridge now, but they're trying to figure out what to do now that ISIS has done what they've done and all the problems that have occurred there, and are we going to now lose all the ground that our blood was shed for? Because we didn't put a force there just to maintain. Not forever, but to maintain. And one of the best examples I have to explain that the way it is was one of the former state reps in the state of Illinois was a guy by the name of Jim Watson out of Jacksonville. Jim Watson and I are both Marines. Jim was actually in the first Desert Storm. And then actually as state rep, went back into the Marine Corps, took a staff sergeant's position. We covered his legislative office for him for about 1.5 years while he went over to try to set up governments, municipal and regional governments in Iraq. And he came back and he and I were talking and he said, Mike, I said, so Jim, what's it like? He said, Mike, think about this. He said, we're trying to teach a group of people about democracy and how free elections work, and that all of a sudden in our country, I run for office, I win, the other guy steps out quietly, we shake hands, the other gal steps out quietly, we shake hands, we go through, we change over, and life goes on. Mike, it isn't that existed in that country 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago. Since the beginning of time, the only thing they know is the biggest stick wins. Now, we set up a democracy, a government that was working. But sometimes you have to just, you don't have to do more than just let them know that it's still a presence to put in the back of their mind. No, if you don't do it this way, it's gonna, then we're gonna be here. And therefore it would have stopped what we had. But let me put that in another perspective though. My thoughts on the military from a different perspective is that whenever I was in the Marine Corps, I never knew how my mom and dad felt. Never knew. I thought, I went in at 18 years old, and the Iran hostage situation was going to go in, and I was going to save the world. And about 3 weeks into boot camp, I realized, okay, you're not going to save the world. You're just going to survive and get through this. But the thing that happened to me personally is the day that my son went to Iraq. And anybody who is in these positions that at some point might have something put in front of them where they will have to vote to send our sons and daughters, that's going to be a thing in the back of my mind that clicks so hard. Because the worst, not the worst day, but one of the scariest days of my life was the day that I walked him down that, to go through those metal detectors at the airport to get on that plane. I'd have done anything to take his place. So it's a different, so as I deal with these issues, I'll deal with that issue too.
Probably you.
You're up.
I'm going to go with the, what do you wish we asked that we didn't?
You already know the response and why, there is one thing. There is one thing. How do I feel about the fact that very few issues are being talked about on the TV ads and everything like that? Instead, we're going down the path that we're going down. And that does frustrate me because there's so many issues out there. And so many things we could actually have a legitimate talk over. And in the debate that we had, and now we've got an upcoming debate, I hope that we continue to focus on issues and not even the jabs that I threw. Okay? I mean, that's not where it needs to go. We need to talk about what's really going on. What's really going on right now, whether it's the borders, whether it's we got a disease that we've got to try to figure out what in the world, how we're going to make sure that if our president doesn't implement no-fly, what are we going to do to make sure everybody's informed? We had a conference call yesterday with on the state level to try to keep aware of this, and I will give praise where praise. Thank the governor's office for putting that together. But there are so many other issues that we need to be dealing with, and instead we go down this advertising of Mike Bost through papers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate you taking the time.